The steel jaws closed around Anna Preston's ankle with a sound like thunder, and in that moment of white-hot agony, she understood that some traps were meant for wolves but would kill a woman just the same. The scream that tore from her throat echoed across the Montana wilderness, sending ravens scattering from the pines above, but there was no one to hear it. No one except the man who had set the trap and was now watching from the shadows with a smile that held no warmth. It was the autumn of 1881, and Anna had been traveling for 3 weeks through territories that grew increasingly wild with each passing mile. She had departed from Philadelphia with a single trunk, a letter from her father that had arrived 6 months prior, and a determination that her mother had warned would be her undoing. That letter, worn from constant reading and refolding, spoke of gold claims and new opportunities in the Montana Territory, of a town called Silver Creek, where her father had finally found his fortune after years of failed ventures. But the letters had stopped coming in February, and by August, Anna could no longer ignore the silence. Her mother, weakened by consumption and confined to her bed, had begged her not to go, but Anna had seen the fear in her eyes. The same fear that kept her awake at night, wondering if her husband was alive or dead in that distant mountain territory. So Anna had kissed her mother's fevered forehead, promised to return with news, and boarded the train westward with enough money sewn into her corset lining to last 3 months if she was careful. The journey had been arduous but manageable until she reached Silver Creek 2 days ago. The town was smaller than she had imagined, little more than a collection of rough wooden buildings clinging to the sides of steep hills, with muddy streets that turned treacherous after rain. She had taken a room at the only boarding house that accepted women traveling alone, run by a stern widow named Mrs. Calloway, who had looked at her Eastern clothes with undisguised skepticism. When Anna inquired about her father, Thomas Preston, she had been met with uncomfortable silences and averted gazes. The clerk at the land office claimed to have no record of any claims registered under that name. The barkeeper at the Lucky Strike saloon said he remembered a man fitting that description, but hadn't seen him in months. The sheriff, a heavy-set man with tobacco-stained whiskers, had been even less helpful, suggesting that men came and went in these parts all the time. And maybe her father had simply moved on to better prospects, but Anna knew her father. Thomas Preston was many things: a dreamer, an optimist, sometimes a fool when it came to business ventures. But he was not the kind of man who would abandon his family without word. He had written faithfully every 2 weeks for 6 months, his letters full of details about the claim he was working, the partners he had taken on, the promising veins of ore they were following into the mountain. Then nothing. Complete silence. On her second day in Silver Creek, Anna had visited the mining recorder's office again, this time with her father's letters in hand, and pointing out the specific claim numbers he had mentioned. The clerk, a young man with nervous eyes, had glanced at the documents and then quickly away. He told her those claims had been abandoned and refiled under new ownership 3 months ago. When she pressed him for details about what had happened to the previous owners, he had stammered something about men leaving claims all the time, about the harsh conditions and dashed hopes that drove prospectors away. There had been something in his manner, though, a furtiveness that set alarm bells ringing in Anna's mind. She had taught literature at a girls' academy for 4 years before making this journey, and in that time she had become adept at reading the subtle tells that indicated when students were lying or hiding something. This clerk was definitely hiding something. That evening, as she sat in the boarding house dining room, picking at a plate of beef and potatoes, a weathered prospector at the next table had leaned over and spoken in a low voice. He told her that if she wanted real answers about missing miners, she should talk to the half-breed tracker who lived in a cabin about 5 miles north of town. Fellow named Aaron Silverstream, he said, Cherokee on his mother's side. He knew these mountains better than anyone and had a reputation for finding things that didn't want to be found, including bodies. The word had hung in the air like a death knell, but Anna had thanked him and asked for more specific directions. The prospector had sketched a rough map on the back of an old assay receipt, warning her that the trail was treacherous and she shouldn't attempt it alone. But Anna had not come all this way to be deterred by warnings about treacherous trails. She had faced down unruly students, navigated the politics of academy administration, and nursed her dying mother through the worst of her illness. She could handle a 5-mile walk through the woods. She had set out at dawn, before Mrs. Calloway could ask questions or try to dissuade her. The morning air was crisp and cold, her breath visible in small clouds as she followed the trail northward out of town. The path was clear enough at first, winding through stands of pine and aspen, crossing small streams on makeshift log bridges. But as the morning wore on, and she climbed higher into the foothills, the trail became less distinct, branching and diverging in ways that didn't match the prospector's crude map. By midday, Anna had to admit to herself that she was lost. The sun was hidden behind thick cloud cover, making it impossible to determine direction with any certainty. She had stopped to rest against a large boulder, trying to decide whether to press forward or attempt to retrace her steps, when she heard it. The sound of someone moving through the brush nearby, branches snapping under heavy footfalls. Relief had flooded through her. Another traveler, perhaps, or even the tracker she was seeking. She had called out, announcing her presence, asking if anyone was there. The footsteps had stopped. Then, after a long moment of silence, a voice had answered, rough with an accent she couldn't quite place. The voice told her she was on private property, told her she needed to turn back the way she had come. But when Anna explained that she was lost and seeking directions to Aaron Silverstream's cabin, the voice had changed tone, become almost friendly. The man stepped into view then, emerging from behind a thick stand of pines. He was tall and rangy, dressed in worn buckskins with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. A rifle was slung across his back, and a large hunting knife hung from his belt. He introduced himself as Jack Cordell, said he worked claims in these hills and knew Silverstream by reputation. If she would follow him, he would point her in the right direction. There was a shortcut through a ravine just ahead that would save her miles of walking. Anna's instincts had whispered warnings, but she had ignored them. She was tired, frustrated, and this man seemed to offer exactly what she needed. So she had followed him off the main trail, such as it was, and into a narrow defile between two rock faces. The ground here was covered in pine needles and fallen leaves, muffling their footsteps. Cordell walked ahead of her, maintaining a steady pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks and offering bits of commentary about the terrain. They had been walking for perhaps 10 minutes when Cordell suddenly stopped and turned to face her. His expression had changed, the friendly mask slipping away to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. He asked her how much money she was carrying, asked if anyone in Silver Creek knew exactly where she had gone today. Fear had jolted through Anna like electricity. She took an instinctive step backward, and that was when her boot came down on the carefully concealed trap. The steel jaws had been hidden beneath a thin layer of leaves and pine needles, set at the perfect angle to catch anyone stepping off the narrow path. They closed with devastating force, the teeth punching through her leather boot and into the flesh of her ankle. The pain was beyond anything Anna had ever experienced, white-hot and all-consuming. She collapsed to the ground, her scream echoing off the ravine walls. Through the haze of agony, she saw Cordell approaching, taking his time, that cold smile still fixed on his face. He told her that she had made this too easy, told her that Eastern women never learned to mind their own business. Her father had been the same way, he said. Too curious about things that didn't concern him. The words cut through Anna's pain. Her father. This man knew something about what had happened to her father. She tried to speak, to demand answers, but another wave of agony stole her breath as she instinctively tried to pull her leg free from the trap. Cordell laughed at her efforts, crouching down just out of reach. He explained that the trap was designed to hold a 200-pound wolf. A woman of her size had no chance of breaking free. He began going through his calculations aloud, as if she were already dead and he was simply working through logistics. The trap would hold her for hours, maybe days, depending on how strong she was. Animals would smell the blood eventually. If she was lucky, she would die of shock or exposure before the wolves found her. If she was unlucky, well, there were worse ways to die, but not many. Anna's vision was starting to blur at the edges, her body going into shock from the pain and trauma. She fumbled for the small pistol she kept in her coat pocket, a derringer her father had given her years ago when she first started teaching at the academy. But Cordell saw the movement and moved faster, kicking her hand away and sending the small weapon spinning into the underbrush. He took her reticule, her small bag of provisions, even the locket she wore around her neck, the locket that contained a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. When he had finished looting what little she had, Cordell stood and brushed the dirt from his hands. He told her that her father had died badly, that he had begged and pleaded at the end, said that she would likely do the same before the wolves came. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the forest, leaving Anna alone with her agony and despair. She didn't know how long she lay there, time becoming meaningless in the haze of pain and fear. She tried to examine the trap, to find some mechanism for releasing it, but every movement sent fresh bolts of agony shooting up her leg. The steel jaws were locked tight, and without tools or leverage, she had no hope of prying them open. Blood was soaking through her boot and stocking, pooling on the ground beneath her. The afternoon light was fading when Anna heard new sounds in the forest. Different from Cordell's heavy footfalls, these were lighter, more careful, the movement of someone who knew how to travel silently through wilderness. Terror gripped her. Had Cordell returned to finish what he started? Or worse, had the wolves already caught the scent of her blood? A figure emerged from the trees, moving with a fluid grace that was almost predatory. But this was no wolf. It was a man, tall and lean, dressed in a mix of buckskins and more conventional clothes. He had dark hair worn long, tied back with a leather cord, and features that spoke of mixed heritage. High cheekbones, copper-toned skin, eyes that were a startling shade of grey-green. He carried a rifle with practiced ease, and a large hunting knife hung at his side. Anna tried to speak, to call for help, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The man's sharp eyes found her immediately, and in 3 swift strides he was kneeling beside her. His gaze took in the trap, the blood, her pale face and labored breathing. His expression remained calm, but she saw something flash in those unusual eyes. Anger, perhaps, or recognition. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, with a slight accent that suggested English was not his first language. He told her his name was Aaron Silverstream, told her that she was going to live, but she needed to hold on, needed to stay conscious and stay strong, because what came next was going to hurt. Anna wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the statement. What came next couldn't possibly hurt more than what she was already experiencing. But then Aaron's hands moved to the trap, and she understood. He examined the mechanism briefly, his fingers tracing the steel with the familiarity of someone who had dealt with such devices before. He told her that he couldn't simply pry the jaws open, that the force required would cause more damage to her leg. Instead, he would need to compress the springs in a specific sequence. He pulled a leather strip from his pack and handed it to her, telling her to bite down on it. When she hesitated, he met her eyes with an intensity that demanded obedience. She took the leather and placed it between her teeth. Aaron positioned himself carefully, bracing his weight, and then his hands moved. The trap resisted, then began to shift. The pressure on Anna's ankle changed, and fresh agony exploded through her leg. She bit down hard on the leather strip, her back arching, a muffled scream tearing from her throat. Then suddenly, blessedly, the jaws opened. Aaron carefully lifted her leg free, and Anna nearly blacked out from the relief, despite the pain that continued to pulse through her injured ankle. Aaron was already moving, pulling medical supplies from his pack with efficient movements. He cut away her boot and stocking, exposing the torn flesh beneath. The trap had left deep puncture wounds on both sides of her ankle, and the surrounding tissue was already badly swollen and beginning to bruise. As he cleaned the wounds with something that burned like liquid fire, Anna found her voice. She asked him how he had found her. Aaron's expression remained focused on his work as he explained that he had heard the scream earlier, but by the time he reached this area, he had found only tracks. He had been following Cordell's trail, knowing that the man was a known claim jumper, and worse. When the trail led to this ravine, he had known he would find either a dead animal or something worse. Anna gritted her teeth as he wrapped her ankle in clean bandages, his movements gentle despite the obvious strength in his hands. She told him that Cordell had mentioned her father, had said things that suggested he knew what had happened to Thomas Preston. Aaron's hands paused briefly in their work, and when he looked up at her, his expression had hardened. He asked if her father was Thomas Preston, the geologist who had been working the Thunder Ridge claims. When Anna nodded, unable to trust her voice, Aaron sat back on his heels and was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he told her that her father had come to him 3 months ago, worried that his partners were falsifying assay reports and cheating their investors. Thomas had asked Aaron to guide him to the Territorial Marshal's office in Helena, but he had never shown up for their planned departure. Anna's heart, which had been clinging to hope despite everything, began to sink. She asked Aaron if he thought her father was dead. The tracker looked at her with something that might have been sympathy in those unusual eyes. He said that in his experience, when men like Jack Cordell started setting traps for wolves in places where people traveled, it usually meant they were trying to cover up something more serious than claim jumping. The implications of his words settled over Anna like a burial shroud. Her father hadn't simply disappeared or moved on to other prospects. He had been murdered, and his body hidden somewhere in these vast mountains, and she had nearly suffered the same fate. Would have, if not for the man kneeling beside her. Aaron finished securing the bandage and then looked at her seriously. He told her that her ankle would heal if properly cared for, but she wouldn't be walking on it for several days, at minimum. The wounds needed to be cleaned and dressed regularly to prevent infection. She would need rest, shelter, and constant care. All things that were impossible to provide in the middle of the wilderness. He stood and scanned the surrounding forest, his posture alert. He said that Cordell would likely return to check his trap eventually, to ensure his victim was dead, or to finish the job if she still lived. They needed to leave this place immediately before the outlaw came back with help. Aaron's cabin was nearly 3 miles away, too far for Anna to walk in her condition. He would have to carry her. Before Anna could process or protest, Aaron bent and scooped her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. The movement jarred her injured ankle, and she couldn't suppress a gasp of pain. Aaron murmured an apology in a language she didn't recognize, probably Cherokee, and adjusted his grip to minimize the pressure on her leg. Then he began to move through the forest with long, steady strides. The journey that followed was a blur of pain and strange intimacy. Anna had no choice but to wrap her arms around Aaron's neck and press close to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing and heartbeat. He navigated the rough terrain with an ease that seemed almost supernatural, never stumbling, always finding the surest footing. Occasionally he would stop and listen, his body going utterly still as he scanned their surroundings for signs of pursuit. As the light faded completely and night settled over the mountains, Aaron continued without pause. The darkness seemed to present no obstacle to him, as if he could see perfectly well by starlight alone. Anna drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain and exhaustion finally overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. At some point she began to shiver uncontrollably, and Aaron pulled a blanket from his pack and wrapped it around her without breaking stride. When she next opened her eyes with any real awareness, they were approaching a small cabin nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, and warm light glowed in the windows. Aaron carried her up the steps and kicked the door open, bringing her into a space that was surprisingly well appointed for a wilderness dwelling. There was a large stone fireplace with a good fire burning. Simple but sturdy furniture, shelves lined with books and supplies, and an air of careful order. Aaron laid her gently on a bed in the corner, layering blankets over her shivering form. Then he moved quickly around the cabin, stoking the fire, heating water and gathering more medical supplies. As warmth began to seep back into Anna's body, the full reality of her situation settled over her. She was alone in the wilderness with a man she didn't know, injured and completely dependent on his care. With standards of Philadelphia society, her reputation was utterly destroyed. But as Aaron returned to her bedside and began carefully removing the temporary bandage to clean her wounds more thoroughly, Anna found that she couldn't bring herself to care about reputation or propriety. This man had saved her life, had tracked her through the wilderness, freed her from that terrible trap, and carried her 3 miles to safety. Whatever else he might be, he was clearly not a man who meant her harm. As if reading her thoughts, Aaron spoke as he worked. He told her that she was safe here, that he would protect her and care for her until she was strong enough to travel. He would send word to Silver Creek that she had been found injured but alive, and would escort her back to town when her ankle had healed sufficiently. But in the meantime, she needed to rest and recover. The next few days would determine whether infection set in, and if it did, she would face a much longer and more difficult road to recovery. Anna watched his face as he spoke, noting the concentration in his expression, the gentleness of his touch despite the obvious strength in his hands. She asked him why he had come looking for her, how he had known she was in danger. Aaron was quiet for a moment, finishing his work before meeting her eyes. He said that he had seen her in Silver Creek the day before, asking questions about her father. He had recognized the name Thomas Preston and had been planning to seek her out, to tell her what he knew about her father's concerns and disappearance. But then this morning, he had encountered the prospector who had given her directions to his cabin. The man had mentioned sending an Eastern woman into the hills alone, and Aaron had known immediately that it was dangerous. These mountains were not safe for anyone traveling alone, particularly not for someone unfamiliar with the terrain and the men who operated in the shadows. So he had followed her trail, tracking her from town until he picked up signs of Cordell's presence as well. The rest, he said with a slight shrug, she already knew. Anna felt tears prick at her eyes, though whether from pain, relief, or gratitude, she couldn't say. She thanked him, her voice breaking slightly on the words. Aaron simply nodded and told her that thanks were not necessary. In his mother's tradition, one did not abandon those in need, especially not women who were far from home and seeking truth about their families. As exhaustion finally claimed her fully, Anna's last conscious thought was that she had set out that morning seeking a tracker who could help her find answers about her father. She had found that man, though not at all in the way she had imagined. And tomorrow, when the pain was less overwhelming and her mind was clearer, she would learn the full truth about what had happened to Thomas Preston in these Montana mountains. Anna woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke, and for a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in Philadelphia, in the small apartment she had shared with her mother. Then the throbbing pain in her ankle brought reality crashing back, along with memories of steel jaws and a man's cold smile as he walked away, leaving her to die. She opened her eyes to find morning sunlight streaming through a small window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden beams. The cabin was quiet, except for the crackle of the fire and soft sounds of movement from somewhere beyond her line of sight. Anna tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her leg. A soft gasp escaped her lips before she could suppress it, and almost instantly Aaron appeared at her bedside. He was dressed differently than the night before, in a simple cotton shirt and dark trousers, his long hair still tied back. In the full light of day, Anna could see him more clearly. The strong lines of his face, the unusual color of his eyes, the scar that ran along his left jawline. He asked how she was feeling, his voice carrying that same calm steadiness from the night before. Anna considered lying, saying she was fine, but the concerned intelligence in his gaze suggested he would see through any deception. She admitted that the pain was considerable, though perhaps slightly less overwhelming than it had been. Aaron nodded, as if this was exactly what he had expected to hear. He told her that pain was good, that it meant the wounds were not yet infected, though the next day or two would be critical. He had prepared a breakfast of cornbread, bacon and coffee, simple fare, but more appealing than anything Anna had eaten since leaving Silver Creek. Aaron helped her sit up carefully, propping pillows behind her back, and brought her a plate. As she ate, he unwrapped the bandages on her ankle to examine the wounds in proper daylight. Anna forced herself to look, though part of her wanted to turn away. The puncture marks were deep and angry-looking, the surrounding flesh swollen and discolored. But Aaron seemed satisfied with what he saw, applying a poultice that smelled strongly of herbs before rewrapping everything with clean cloth. While he worked, Anna studied the cabin with greater attention than she had been capable of the night before. It was larger than it had first appeared, well built with carefully chinked logs and a solid roof. The furnishings were sparse but well crafted, the work of someone who knew how to make things that would last. What struck her most was the number of books, dozens of volumes lined up on shelves along one wall. She could make out titles on natural history, tracking, medicine, even poetry. This was not the dwelling of an uneducated frontiersman. Aaron caught her gaze and followed it to the bookshelf. A slight smile touched his lips, the first expression of anything beyond serious concern she had seen from him. He explained that his father had been a surveyor and cartographer from Boston, a learned man who had come west after the war. His mother had been Cherokee, from a family that had escaped the forced removal to Oklahoma Territory by hiding in the mountains of North Carolina. His father had taught him to read and write in English, to understand mathematics and geography. His mother had taught him the ways of the forest, the language of tracks and signs, the skills that kept a person alive in wilderness. Anna found herself fascinated despite the circumstances. She asked what had brought him to Montana, so far from both his parents' homelands. Aaron's expression clouded slightly, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he told her that both his parents had died of fever when he was 16, that he had drifted west, working as a scout and tracker for various expeditions and survey teams. He had come to Montana 5 years ago and found these mountains suited him, wild enough that a man of mixed blood could live without constant questions or judgments about where he belonged. There was something in his tone that spoke of old wounds, of a lifetime of existing between worlds and being fully accepted by neither. Anna understood that feeling more than she might have a few weeks ago. She had spent her adult life as a woman, with education and independence, in a society that expected females to be ornamental and obedient. She had faced disapproval and dismissal, though nothing as severe as what Aaron must have experienced. Still, it created an unexpected bridge of understanding between them. After breakfast, Aaron informed her that he needed to ride into Silver Creek to send word that she was alive and recovering. Mrs. Calloway would be worried. And more importantly, it was essential that people knew Anna was under his protection. Word would spread quickly, and with luck, it would reach Jack Cordell. The outlaw needed to know that his victim had survived and that she was not alone. It might make him think twice about attempting to finish what he had started. Anna's stomach tightened with fear at the thought of Aaron leaving her alone, but she forced herself to nod. She understood the necessity, and more than that, she understood that Aaron was right to establish publicly that she was under his care. It would create a measure of protection, a line that Cordell would have to think carefully before crossing. Aaron seemed to read her fear anyway. He told her that he would be gone no more than 4 hours, that the cabin was secure, and that he was leaving his shotgun with her, along with clear instructions on how to use it if anyone approached. He showed her how to load and fire the weapon, his hands guiding hers with patient precision. The gun was heavy, and Anna wasn't certain she would actually be able to use it if the moment came, but its weight was reassuring nonetheless. Aaron positioned it within easy reach of the bed and reminded her that she should shoot first and ask questions later if anyone tried to enter the cabin in his absence. Then, with a final check of her bandages and the fire, he departed, The silence that descended after his departure was profound and unsettling. Anna had never been truly alone in wilderness before. Even on her journey west, there had always been other travelers nearby. The presence of civilization never more than a day's journey away. Now she was isolated in a cabin miles from any settlement, injured and vulnerable. Every sound seemed amplified. Every creak of the cabin timbers made her heart race. She kept the shotgun across her lap and her eyes fixed on the door. To distract herself from mounting anxiety, Anna tried to piece together what she knew about her father's disappearance and the man who had tried to kill her. Jack Cordell had admitted knowing her father, had mentioned that Thomas Preston had been too curious about things that didn't concern him. Aaron had said her father suspected his partners of fraud, of falsifying assay reports. It suggested a larger conspiracy, something worth killing to protect. Anna thought back to her father's letters, trying to remember names he had mentioned. There had been two partners initially, she recalled. A man named Vernon Hale, who claimed to have experience in Montana mining operations, and another named Silas Crawford, who apparently had connections to investors back east. Her father's letters had been enthusiastic at first, full of optimism about the potential of their claim, but in the last few letters before the silence, she remembered a subtle shift in tone. Nothing explicit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But a sense of concern creeping in around the edges of his usual cheerful reporting. One letter in particular came back to her now with new significance. Her father had written about discrepancies between the ore samples he was analyzing and the official assay reports. He had mentioned wanting to conduct his own independent tests to verify the numbers before they approached investors for additional capital. That letter had arrived in late January, and there had been only two more after it, both shorter and less detailed than usual. Then nothing. Anna felt tears burning in her eyes as the full picture began to form. Her father had discovered fraud, had likely confronted his partners or threatened to expose them, and they had killed him for it. Killed him and disposed of his body somewhere in these vast mountains where it would never be found. And she had very nearly suffered the same fate, stumbling into the same deadly trap simply by asking questions. The sound of a horse approaching sent her heart into her throat. She gripped the shotgun tighter, her finger finding the trigger as Aaron had shown her. But then she heard a familiar low whistle, the signal Aaron had told her he would use on his return. Relief flooded through her as he entered, carrying several bundles and wearing an expression that suggested the trip to town had been productive, if complicated. Aaron deposited the bundles on the table and moved to check the fire before coming to sit in the chair beside her bed. He reported that Mrs. Calloway had indeed been frantic with worry when Anna hadn't returned the previous day. The widow had already organized a search party that was preparing to set out when Aaron arrived with news that Anna had been found injured but alive. He had told a carefully edited version of the truth, saying that she had gotten lost on the trail and stepped in an old trap, that he had found her and brought her to his cabin to recover. What he had not mentioned was Jack Cordell's involvement, or the fact that the trap had been deliberately set. That information would come out later, Aaron explained, but for now it was better to let Cordell think his role in the incident was still unknown. It would give them time to gather evidence and plan their next moves. Anna started to ask what next moves he meant, but Aaron held up a hand, indicating he had more to tell her. Word had spread quickly through Silver Creek about Anna's injury, and it had produced an interesting result. A young clerk from the mining recorder's office, the same nervous young man Anna had spoken with days before, had sought Aaron out privately. Away from the potential observation of his employer or others who might report back, the clerk had been willing to talk. His name was Peter Sutton, and what he told Aaron confirmed Anna's worst fears. Thomas Preston had indeed been murdered, along with another prospector named Daniel Whitmore, who had also begun asking uncomfortable questions about claim ownership and assay reports. Both men had disappeared within days of each other 3 months ago. The official story was that they had abandoned their claims and left the territory, but Peter had seen documentation that suggested something far more sinister. Vernon Hale and Silas Crawford, Anna's father's partners, had filed new claims on the same properties immediately after the disappearances, listing the previous owners as having relinquished their rights. More than that, Peter had discovered a pattern. Over the past 2 years, at least 8 other small claim holders had disappeared under similar circumstances, their properties absorbed by a growing network of claims controlled by Hale, Crawford, and several other prominent citizens of Silver Creek. The missing men's families, when they inquired, were told their relatives had simply moved on, as was common in mining communities. No investigations were conducted, no bodies were ever found. Anna listened with growing horror and rage. Her father hadn't just been murdered. He had been one victim among many in what amounted to an organized campaign of theft and killing. And the perpetrators were not just random outlaws, like Jack Cordell, but supposedly respectable businessmen operating with impunity under the cover of legitimate enterprise. She demanded to know why the sheriff hadn't investigated, why the territorial authorities hadn't been notified. Aaron's expression turned grim. He explained that Sheriff Dalton received generous contributions from the mining consortium that Hale and Crawford had established. The lawman looked the other way when convenient and actively discouraged questions when necessary. As for territorial authorities, they were based in Helena, nearly 100 miles away, and small disputes over mining claims in remote areas rarely caught their attention. Men disappeared in the wilderness all the time, and without bodies or clear evidence of foul play, there was little appetite for investigation. But Peter Sutton had evidence, Aaron continued. Or at least he knew where evidence was kept. Hale and Crawford maintained a second set of records, the real accounting of their operation, hidden in a safe at their office in Silver Creek. Peter had seen these documents once when Crawford thought he was out of the building. They showed the true value of the ore being extracted, which was significantly higher than the official assay reports indicated. And they contained a ledger of payments made to various individuals, including Sheriff Dalton and several others whose cooperation was necessary for the scheme to continue. Anna's mind was racing now, the teacher and analyst in her organizing information into patterns and connections. She asked why Peter hadn't simply stolen these documents and taken them to the authorities himself. Aaron's slight smile suggested he had asked the same question. The answer was practical, if disappointing. Peter was a clerk with no standing or credibility, a young man whose testimony would be dismissed as the grudge of a disgruntled employee. More than that, he had a widowed mother and 2 younger sisters depending on his income. If he moved against Hale and Crawford openly, he would lose his position and likely face retaliation. But if someone else were to acquire those documents, someone with no official connection to Silver Creek and no obvious motive beyond seeking justice for murdered family members, that testimony might carry more weight, especially if that person could get the documents to territorial authorities before Hale and Crawford realized what had happened and destroyed the evidence. Aaron let the implication hang in the air between them. Anna understood immediately what he was suggesting. With her father dead, she was his only surviving family member with legal standing to pursue his claims and investigate his disappearance. If she could obtain the hidden records and present them to authorities, it would provide the evidence needed to bring charges not just against Cordell, but against the entire conspiracy. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also the only way to ensure her father's murder was avenged and that his killers faced justice. She told Aaron she would do it, whatever was required. His expression suggested he had expected no other answer, but there was something else in his eyes now, a mixture of respect and concern that warmed something in Anna's chest despite the grim nature of their conversation. He cautioned that her ankle needed more time to heal before she could attempt anything strenuous, that they had at least several days before she would be capable of the kind of movement that would be required. In the meantime, Aaron had brought supplies from town, including proper clothes for Anna, since her traveling dress had been ruined by blood and rough treatment. Mrs. Calloway had contributed several items, practical garments more suited to frontier life than Eastern fashion. There were also medical supplies, food staples, and several letters that had been waiting for Anna at the boarding house. One was from her mother's nurse in Philadelphia, its exterior marked with the kind of careful penmanship that suggested difficult news. Anna's hands trembled as she opened the letter, though part of her already knew what it would say. The nurse wrote that her mother had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 weeks ago, that she had been buried in the family plot beside Anna's grandparents, and that she had spoken Anna's name in her final moments. The nurse assured Anna that her mother had been comfortable at the end, free from pain, and that she should not feel guilty for being away. Her mother had understood why Anna needed to go west, had been proud of her daughter's courage even as she feared for her safety. The grief that crashed over Anna was complicated by exhaustion, pain, and the strange intensity of her current circumstances. She had lost both parents now, was truly alone in the world, except for distant cousins she barely knew. The tears came silently at first, then in great racking sobs that made her injured ankle throb with renewed pain. Through it all, Aaron sat, quietly beside her bed, not offering empty platitudes or false comfort, simply present in a way that somehow made the grief more bearable. When the storm of weeping finally subsided, Anna found herself talking, telling Aaron about her parents in a way she hadn't spoken of them to anyone. She described her father's gentle optimism, his endless enthusiasm for new ventures that so often ended in failure but never dimmed his hope for the next opportunity. She spoke of her mother's quiet strength, the way she had held their family together through financial difficulties and disappointments, her fierce pride in Anna's education and accomplishments, even as society deemed such things inappropriate. For women, Aaron listened without interruption, and when she finished, he shared memories of his own parents, his father's passion for mapping the unmapped, for bringing order and understanding to wilderness, his mother's deep knowledge of plants and animals, her ability to read the forest like others read books. He spoke of the isolated cabin where he had grown up, caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither but carrying the gifts of both. As afternoon faded toward evening, a strange intimacy had developed between them, born of shared loss and dangerous purpose. Anna realized that in the space of 2 days, this man had become more essential to her well-being than people she had known for years. He had saved her life, tended her injuries, and now was offering to help her pursue justice for her father, even though it would put him at considerable risk. She asked him why he was doing this, why he was willing to involve himself in something that wasn't truly his concern. Aaron was quiet for a long moment, his unusual eyes reflecting firelight. He said that he had liked her father, that Thomas Preston had treated him with respect and dignity that many white men did not extend to those of mixed blood. More than that, he was tired of watching men like Hale and Crawford operate with impunity, destroying lives and families while hiding behind the veneer of respectability. If Anna was willing to stand against them, he would stand with her. Things were worth the risk. The conviction in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through Anna's chest. She thanked him, knowing the words were inadequate but unable to find better ones. Aaron simply nodded and rose to prepare their evening meal. As he moved about the cabin with quiet efficiency, Anna found herself watching him with an attention that went beyond gratitude. There was something compelling about his calm competence, the way he inhabited his space with utter confidence, the gentle strength in his hands when he tended her injuries. Over supper, they began to plan in earnest. Peter Sutton had provided information about the layout of the Hale and Crawford office, including the location of the safe where the hidden records were kept. The safe itself was old but solid, not something that could be easily broken into without the proper tools and knowledge. However, Peter had also mentioned that Crawford had a habit of working late on Thursday evenings, going over the week's accounts in preparation for Friday meetings with investors. On those nights, the safe was often left open for easier access to documents. It was Tuesday evening now, which meant they had 2 days for Anna's ankle to heal enough for her to travel and for them to finalize their approach. Aaron knew a man in a mining camp halfway between his cabin and Silver Creek, an explosives expert named Hugh McCarthy, who had no love for the mining consortium after they had forced him out of a profitable claim. Hugh might be willing to help, either by providing tools to open the safe or by creating a distraction that would allow them access to the office. But there were significant obstacles beyond the physical challenges of breaking into the office. Hale and Crawford maintained guards on their property at night, usually Jack Cordell or one of his associates. The building was located on Silver Creek's main street, which meant any unusual activity would be observed by numerous potential witnesses, and even if they successfully obtained the documents, they would need to get them safely to Helena before Hale and Crawford realized what had happened and sent men to intercept them. Anna suggested that perhaps they should involve Peter Sutton more directly, have him copy the relevant documents rather than stealing the originals. Aaron shook his head, explaining that Peter's position was too precarious, that asking him to do more than provide information would be unfair and dangerous. More than that, copies could be dismissed as forgeries. They needed the original ledgers and correspondence, documents that could be verified as authentic by experts. As they talked through various scenarios and possibilities, Anna became increasingly aware of how much Aaron was risking on her behalf. He had built a quiet life here in these mountains, asking little of society and receiving the same in return. By helping her pursue this course of action, he was putting himself directly in conflict with powerful men who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. If things went wrong, he could lose not just his property, but his life. She voiced these concerns as the fire burned low and exhaustion began to claim her again. Aaron's response was characteristically direct. He said that some things mattered more than personal safety or peaceful isolation. Justice was one of those things, and so was standing with someone who had been grievously wronged. He would not turn away from this fight simply because it was dangerous. That would make him no better than the men who looked the other way while Hale and Crawford destroyed lives. As Anna drifted towards sleep, her last conscious thought was that she had come to Montana seeking her father and answers about his disappearance. She had found both, though not in the way she had imagined, but she had also found something else, something unexpected and precious. She had found an ally, a protector, and perhaps, though it was too soon to name it clearly, the beginning of something that felt remarkably like the kind of connection that could sustain a person through any hardship. The morning of the third day brought a test that neither Anna nor Aaron had anticipated. She woke to the sound of horses and voices outside the cabin, multiple riders by the sound of it, and Aaron was already at the window with his rifle in hand. His posture was tense, but controlled as he peered through the gap in the curtains, and when he turned back to Anna, his expression was carefully neutral in a way that told her the situation was serious. He told her to stay quiet and keep the shotgun ready, but out of sight beneath the blankets. Then he moved to the door and stepped out onto the porch, pulling it closed behind him. Anna's heart hammered as she strained to hear the conversation that followed, made difficult by the thick log walls, but not impossible. She recognized one, the voice immediately, the rough drawl of Jack Cordell, and her blood turned to ice. Cordell was asking about the Eastern woman, saying he'd heard in town that Aaron had found some lost city girl who'd gotten herself caught in a trap. He wanted to know how she was doing, whether she was recovering well, his tone suggesting friendly concern, but carrying an undercurrent that made Anna's skin crawl. Aaron's response was calm and measured, confirming that yes, he had found a woman, injured on the trail, and was providing care until she could travel safely back to town. Another voice joined the conversation, this one smoother and more educated. The speaker introduced himself as Vernon Hale, said he was concerned about Miss Preston's welfare, as he had been business partners with her late father. Anna's grip tightened on the shotgun at the mention of her father, rage and fear warring in her chest. Hale was expressing regret that Thomas Preston had left the territory so suddenly, said there had been some misunderstandings about the claim that he wished they could have resolved amicably. Aaron's response was polite, but offered no additional information. He said that Miss Preston was resting and not yet ready for visitors, that her injuries required careful monitoring, and that he would escort her back to Silver Creek when the doctor felt she was strong enough to travel. There was a long pause, and Anna could almost feel the tension crackling in the air outside. Then Hale spoke again, his voice carrying a barely veiled threat beneath its civilized veneer. He said it was unfortunate that Miss Preston had gotten lost in such a dangerous area, that the mountains held many perils for those unfamiliar with their ways. He hoped that during her recovery she wouldn't trouble herself with unnecessary inquiries or upset herself with unfounded speculation about her father's departure. Sometimes, Hale suggested, it was better to accept difficult truths and move forward rather than stirring up matters that were best left settled. The implication was crystal clear, a warning dressed up as concern. Anna felt fury rising in her throat, wanted to burst through the door and confront this man who spoke so smoothly about her father while having ordered his murder. But Aaron's earlier instructions echoed in her mind: stay quiet, stay hidden. Let them think she was too injured and frightened to pose a threat. So she bit down on her anger and remained silent. Aaron's voice came again, thanking Hale for his concern, but assuring him that Miss Preston was focused entirely on her recovery and would likely return east as soon as she was able to travel. The journey had been harder than she anticipated, Aaron said, and she had expressed regret about coming west at all. This seemed to satisfy Hale somewhat, and Anna heard him wish Aaron well before the sound of horses indicated the group was departing. But they didn't leave immediately. Through the window, Anna could see shadows moving around the cabin, and she realized with growing dread that Cordell, or one of the others, was circling the building, possibly looking for signs of how serious her injuries actually were, or whether Aaron was hiding anything. She forced herself to remain still, to breathe slowly and quietly. Though every instinct screamed at her to reach for the shotgun and prepare to defend herself. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the riders departed. Aaron waited until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely before returning inside. His face was grim as he checked the windows and door, verifying that no one had attempted to gain entry or tamper with anything during their visit. Then he came to sit beside Anna's bed, and she could see the anger simmering beneath his controlled exterior. He told her that the visit confirmed his worst suspicions. Hale Crawford knew that Anna was aware something had happened to her father, and they were worried about what she might do with that knowledge. The fact that Cordell had accompanied Hale was particularly troubling. It suggested they were preparing to take action if their warning wasn't heeded. Aaron's deliberately vague responses had bought them some time, but that time was limited. They needed to move forward with their plans sooner than anticipated. Anna asked if he thought they would try to kill her here at the cabin. Aaron considered the question carefully before responding. He said that an outright attack on his property would be risky for them. It would draw attention and raise questions that they preferred to avoid. But an accident during her return journey to town, a fall from a horse, or an encounter with wild animals, such things happened in the wilderness and rarely prompted investigation. They would be watching and waiting for an opportunity, a car. The realization that she was essentially trapped, too injured to flee, but also unsafe to remain indefinitely, settled over Anna like a suffocating blanket. But along with the fear came a hardening of resolve. These men had killed her father and countless others, and now they thought they could intimidate her into silence or arrange her convenient disappearance. The rage that thought provoked burned away much of her fear, replacing it with cold determination. She told Aaron that they should proceed with the plan that very night. Her ankle was healing rapidly, the swelling much reduced, and the wound showing no signs of infection. She could ride if necessary, even if it meant gritting her teeth through the pain. Aaron started to object, to argue that she needed more time, but something in Anna's expression stopped him. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He said that if they were going to act tonight, they needed to use the remaining daylight hours to prepare thoroughly. He would ride to the mining camp and speak with Hugh McCarthy about assistance, while Anna rested and gathered her strength for what would be a demanding night. Before he left, Aaron showed her how to bar the door from inside and reminded her that his rifle and shotgun were both loaded and within reach. If anyone approached while he was gone, she should assume hostile intent and act accordingly. After Aaron departed, Anna forced herself to eat, and then attempted to stand for the first time since her injury. The pain was significant but manageable, and she found that by keeping most of her weight on her uninjured leg and using the chair for support, she could move short distances. It wasn't graceful and certainly wouldn't allow for running, but it was better than being completely immobile. She practiced moving around the cabin, testing her limits and building confidence. She also took the opportunity to examine Aaron's books more closely. Among the volumes on tracking and survival were works of philosophy and poetry, including a worn copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass, with numerous passages marked. There was a journal, too, filled with sketches of plants and animals, notes about weather patterns and animal behavior, and occasional entries in what she assumed was Cherokee language. The picture that emerged was of a man of considerable depth and complexity, someone who thought carefully about the world and his place in it. Aaron returned in the early afternoon with news that Hugh McCarthy had agreed to help. The explosives expert had been waiting for an opportunity to strike back at the mining consortium, and this seemed like the perfect chance. Hugh would create a distraction at the opposite end of town, a small fire at an abandoned warehouse that would draw attention and manpower away from the main street. It would give them perhaps 20 minutes to access the Hale and Crawford office, open the safe, and retrieve the documents. The plan was simple, which Aaron said was the best kind. They would wait until after dark, then ride to within a mile of Silver Creek and approach on foot. Hugh would start his fire at precisely 10 o'clock, and while the town's attention was focused on containing it, they would break into the office through a back window that Peter Sutton had confirmed was often left unlatched. Once inside, Anna would photograph the relevant documents using a small camera that Hugh had procured, creating copies while leaving the originals in place. This modification to their earlier plan was Aaron's contribution. He had realized that stealing the documents would immediately alert Hale and Crawford that someone was building a case against them, giving them time to flee or destroy other evidence. But if the documents remained in place, the conspirators would have no reason to suspect their secrets had been compromised until authorities arrived with warrants. By then, it would be too late for them to escape justice. Anna was impressed by the tactical thinking and said so. Aaron's slight smile suggested he appreciated the compliment, but was too focused on the task ahead to dwell on it. He showed her the camera, a compact model designed for detective work and documentation, and explained how to operate it. The process was more complex than simply pointing and clicking, requiring careful attention to light, focus, and exposure time. But Anna's sharp mind grasped the essentials quickly. As evening approached, they prepared with quiet efficiency. Aaron cleaned and loaded his weapons, while Anna changed into the practical clothes Mrs. Calloway had provided, dark trousers and a shirt that would blend into shadows. Aaron fashioned a support for her injured ankle using leather strips and padding, tight enough to provide stability, but not so constrictive that it cut off circulation. It wouldn't eliminate the pain, but it would allow her to move more effectively. They ate an early supper, though neither had much appetite. The weight of what they were about to attempt hung heavy in the small cabin. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, and they could both end up dead in a ditch like Anna's father. But the alternative, letting murderers continue to operate with impunity, was unacceptable to both of them. So they checked their preparations once more and waited for darkness to fall. The ride to Silver Creek was tense and uncomfortable. Anna's ankle throbbed with each movement of the horse, but she forced the pain to the back of her mind and focused on the task ahead. Aaron led them on a circuitous route that avoided main trails, using his intimate knowledge of the terrain to bring them to the outskirts of town unobserved. They left their horses tethered in a small grove with water nearby and continued on foot. The town was quiet as they moved through its shadows, most residents already retired for the night. A few establishments remained open, spilling light and noise into the street, but these were easily avoided. Aaron moved like a ghost, his footsteps silent even on the wooden boardwalks, and Anna did her best to match his caution despite her limp. They reached the rear of the Hale and Crawford building without incident and found the window Peter had mentioned. Unlatched as promised, Aaron boosted Anna through first, his hands steady at her waist as he lifted her with careful strength. She bit back a gasp as her injured ankle took her weight upon landing, but managed to stay upright. Aaron followed immediately, moving through the window with fluid grace. They stood in darkness for a moment, letting their eyes adjust, and Anna became aware of the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The office was larger than she had expected, with several desks and filing cabinets occupying the main room. Aaron oriented himself quickly and led her to a door at the back that opened into a private office, clearly belonging to someone of authority. The safe was exactly where Peter had described it, a large iron box built into the wall behind an imposing desk. Anna's heart sank as she saw that it was closed and locked, not left open as they had hoped. Aaron knelt beside it and examined the mechanism by the light of a small hooded lantern he had brought. He produced a set of tools from his pack, delicate instruments that looked designed for picking locks. Anna watched in fascination as his fingers worked with patient precision, manipulating the tumblers inside the lock. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, and Anna found herself constantly glancing at the windows, expecting at any moment to see faces peering in or hear voices raised in alarm. Then, with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the silent office, the safe door swung open. Aaron stepped back and gestured for Anna to proceed. Inside were numerous documents, ledgers, and correspondence files. Anna's hands trembled slightly as she began sorting through them, looking for the materials Peter had described. It took precious minutes to locate the relevant ledgers, the ones that showed the true accounting of the mining operation and the payments to various corrupt officials. She was halfway through photographing the first ledger when the sound of an explosion rocked the night. Hugh's distraction had begun, right on schedule. Through the window, Anna could see an orange glow rising from the far end of town, and almost immediately they heard shouts and the sound of people running toward the fire. The timing was perfect, but it also meant their window of opportunity was limited. Once the fire was contained, people would return to their normal activities, and the risk of discovery would increase dramatically. Anna worked as quickly as she could, her fingers flying as she positioned each page, adjusted the camera, and triggered the shutter. Aaron stood guard at the door, his body tense and alert, occasionally reporting on the activity outside. The minutes stretched like hours, each second feeling like it might be their last before someone noticed the light in the office or decided to check on the building's security. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. She had just finished photographing the last critical page when Aaron hissed a warning. Someone was approaching the front of the building, a man with a lantern, probably a watchman checking on properties during the confusion of the fire. Anna's hands moved with frantic speed to return the documents to their original positions in the safe, trying to replicate exactly how she had found them. Aaron was already moving back toward the window they had entered through, gesturing urgently for her to follow. But in her haste, Anna knocked a small ledger from the desk. It hit the floor with a thud that seemed impossibly loud, and she froze in horror. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then they heard the watchman's voice calling out, asking if someone was inside the building. The front door rattled as he tested the lock, and Anna knew they had only seconds before he decided to investigate more thoroughly. Aaron grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the window. He lifted her through with urgent strength, and she tumbled onto the ground outside, her injured ankle screaming in protest. Aaron followed immediately, and they were moving before he had fully cleared the window, running as quietly as possible through the shadows behind the buildings. Behind them, they heard the watchman entering the office, his lantern light sweeping across the space they had just vacated. They had gone perhaps 3 blocks when the alarm was raised. Someone had discovered evidence of their intrusion, probably the disturbed papers or the lingering smell of the camera's flash powder. Voices began shouting, calling for the sheriff and for men to search the area. Anna and Aaron pressed themselves into the deep shadows of an alleyway as several armed men ran past, heading toward the office building. Aaron's hand found Anna's in the darkness, squeezing gently, a silent message of reassurance and solidarity. They waited until the immediate commotion had moved away from their position, then began working their way toward the edge of town where they had left the horses. But it quickly became apparent that their escape route was compromised. Men with lanterns and torches were spreading out, forming a rough perimeter that would make it difficult to slip through undetected. Aaron pulled Anna into the recessed doorway of a closed shop, and they pressed close together, hardly daring to breathe as 2 searchers passed within feet of their hiding place. Anna was acutely aware of Aaron's warmth, his strength, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her own racing pulse. When the danger had passed, he leaned close and whispered directly into her ear, his breath warm against her skin. He told her that they couldn't reach the horses without being seen, that they needed an alternative escape route. He knew a way out through the buildings themselves, a path over rooftops that would bring them to a different section of town, where they could slip away unnoticed. But it would require climbing, and with her injured ankle, it would be extremely difficult. Anna didn't hesitate. She told him she could do it, that she had to do it, that failure was not an option. What followed was perhaps the most harrowing hour of Anna's life. Aaron led her through a series of interconnected buildings, finding access points that suggested he had scouted these routes long ago, perhaps anticipating a day when such knowledge might prove necessary. They climbed stairs and ladders, crossed roof peaks with terrifying drops on either side, and squeezed through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow. Anna's ankle was a constant source of agony, but fear and determination drove her forward. At one point, they had to cross a gap between buildings, a jump of perhaps 5 feet over an alley that seemed to drop away into infinite darkness below. Aaron went first, landing lightly on the opposite roof and turning to help her. Anna gathered herself, pushed off with her good leg, and for a heart-stopping moment she was airborne with nothing but empty space beneath her. Then Aaron's hands caught her, strong and sure, pulling her safely onto the roof beside him. They finally reached the far edge of town, where the buildings gave way to wilderness. Aaron led her down a rain barrel and trellis combination that served as a makeshift ladder. And then they were moving through the trees, putting distance between themselves and the search that continued behind them. It was only when they were well clear of town that Aaron allowed them to stop and catch their breath. Anna leaned against a tree, her chest heaving and her ankle throbbing with such intensity that she felt momentarily dizzy. But when she looked at Aaron, illuminated by moonlight filtering through the branches above, she found herself smiling despite the pain and danger. They had done it. Against all odds, they had obtained the evidence they needed and escaped without being identified. The camera with its precious photographs was safely secured in Aaron's pack. Aaron returned her smile, and for a moment something passed between them. An acknowledgement of shared danger survived, of trust given and honored, of partnership forged in fire. Then practical concerns reasserted themselves, and Aaron was checking her ankle, examining the support wrap to ensure it hadn't been compromised by their desperate flight. His touch was gentle despite the urgency of their situation, and Anna found herself watching his face as he worked, memorizing its planes and angles in the silver moonlight. They couldn't return to the horses they had left earlier, Aaron explained. Those would certainly be found by searchers, and Hale's men would be watching that area. Instead, they would need to make their way cross-country to a different location, where Aaron kept a second cabin, a small hunting shelter that few people knew existed. From there, they could plan their journey to Helena to deliver the photographs to territorial authorities. The trek to the shelter took most of the remaining night. Anna's stamina was pushed beyond limits she hadn't known she possessed, but whenever she faltered, Aaron was there with steady support and quiet encouragement. He never suggested giving up or finding a place to hide until morning, seeming to understand that putting distance between themselves and pursuit was essential. By the time they reached the small cabin hidden in a dense grove of aspen, Anna was running on will alone. The shelter was tiny, barely large enough for two people, with a single room that contained little more than a bed frame, a small stove and some basic supplies. But it was shelter and safety, and Anna nearly wept with relief as Aaron helped her inside and got a fire going. He examined her ankle again in the firelight, and his expression grew concerned. The wrap had held, but the extended activity had caused fresh bleeding and significant swelling. He told her that they would need to rest here for at least a day before attempting the journey to Helena. Anna started to protest that they couldn't afford the delay, that Hale and Crawford might discover what had been photographed and destroy the originals. But Aaron pointed out that she would never make it to Helena in her current condition, that pushing her body further without rest would risk permanent damage or infection that could cost her the leg entirely. The stark reality of that statement silenced her objections. She allowed Aaron to help her onto the bed, too exhausted to feel self-conscious about the intimacy of the small space or the fact that they would be spending the night in very close quarters. Aaron tended her ankle with the same careful attention he had shown from the beginning, applying fresh medicine and clean bandages before covering her with blankets against the mountain cold. As she drifted towards sleep, Anna felt Aaron settle beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. His presence was deeply comforting, a bulwark against fear and pain. She found herself thinking about how much had changed in just a few days, how this man, who had been a complete stranger, had become the person she trusted most in the world. And with that thought, she finally surrendered to exhaustion. Anna woke to the sound of rain drumming against the roof of the tiny shelter, a steady rhythm that spoke of a storm that had settled in for the long haul. Grey light filtered through the single small window, suggesting it was well past dawn, though. The heavy clouds made it difficult to judge the exact time. She became aware of warmth at her back, and realized with a start that during the night she and Aaron had gravitated toward each other, his arm draped protectively over her waist as they slept. She lay still for a moment, unwilling to disturb. The peaceful intimacy of the position, despite knowing it crossed boundaries that proper society would deem scandalous. But propriety seemed like a concept from another world entirely, something that belonged to the life she had left behind in Philadelphia rather than the reality she now inhabited. Here in this remote cabin, with danger lurking in every direction, and her father's murderers still at large, the warmth and security of Aaron's presence felt like the most natural thing in the world. Aaron stirred behind her, and she felt the moment he became fully aware of their position. His body tensed slightly, and he began to withdraw his arm, but Anna's hand moved almost of its own accord to cover his, keeping it in place. She felt rather than heard his sharp intake of breath, the stillness that followed as he processed this silent message. Then his fingers curled gently around hers, accepting what she was offering, and they lay together listening to the rain. Eventually, practical necessities forced them to rise. Aaron built up the fire while Anna tested her ankle, finding it stiff and sore, but noticeably better than the night before. The swelling had decreased significantly, and when she put weight on it, the pain was sharp but manageable. She would be able to ride, though it wouldn't be comfortable. Aaron watched her experimental movements with a critical eye, and she could see him making calculations about how far she could safely travel. He had provisions stored in the cabin, dried meat and hardtack that would sustain them, but offered little in the way of comfort. As they ate a spare breakfast, Aaron outlined the challenge that lay ahead. Helena was nearly 100 miles away, a journey that would normally take 3 or 4 days of steady riding. But they would be traveling through territory where Hale's reach extended, where any number of supposedly law-abiding citizens might report their presence in exchange for reward money or favor. More than that, they had to assume that by now Hale and Crawford had realized someone had accessed their office during the fire, even if they hadn't yet discovered what specifically had been photographed. They would be taking precautions. Guards would be posted, telegrams would be sent to allies in other towns, and a significant bounty would likely be placed on information leading to the capture of the intruders. Every mile they traveled would be fraught with the possibility of ambush or betrayal. Anna listened to this assessment with growing determination rather than fear. She told Aaron that difficult odds had never stopped her from pursuing what was right, that she had not come this far and endured this much to turn back now. She had photographs that could bring down murderers and expose a conspiracy that had claimed dozens of lives. Getting those photographs to the territorial marshal was worth any risk, any hardship. Aaron's expression softened as he listened, and she saw something like admiration in his unusual eyes. The storm continued throughout the morning, heavy enough that travel would be foolish even without their other concerns. Aaron used the enforced idleness to develop their strategy, sketching crude maps in the dirt floor of the cabin and talking through various routes and contingencies. He knew of several families along the way, prospectors and homesteaders who had no love for the mining consortium and might offer shelter or assistance. But trusting anyone carried risk, and they would need to be selective about when and where they sought help. As the day wore on, Anna found herself studying Aaron in the close confines of the shelter, noticing details she had been too preoccupied or exhausted to register before. The way his hands moved with unconscious grace, whether tending the fire or cleaning his rifle. The quiet intensity of his focus when working through problems. The occasional glimpses of dry humor that surfaced in his comments. She found herself wondering about the life he had built in these mountains, the solitude he had chosen, and what it had cost him. She asked him if he ever regretted coming west, leaving behind whatever life he might have had in more settled areas. Aaron was quiet for a long time, his gaze fixed on the flames in the small stove. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and thoughtful. He said that regret was a complicated thing, that he couldn't deny there were moments when the isolation wore on him, when he wondered what it would be like to live somewhere he didn't constantly navigate the suspicion or hostility that came with his mixed heritage. But the mountains had given him something he had never found elsewhere, the freedom to be himself without apology or explanation, to live according to his own code, rather than constantly adapting to the expectations of societies that would never fully accept him. The solitude he had chosen was preferable to the loneliness he had felt surrounded by people who saw him as somehow less than fully human. Here, he was simply Aaron, and that was enough. Anna understood that sentiment more deeply than she might have before her journey west. She had spent years in Philadelphia conforming to expectations that felt like a cage, teaching acceptable subjects to young women who were being groomed for lives of decorative uselessness. She had been tolerated because her education was tempered by proper deference, because she knew when to soften her intelligence to avoid threatening male authority. The freedom to speak her mind and pursue her own goals without constant judgment had been a revelation. She shared these thoughts with Aaron, describing the subtle and not-so-subtle ways women of her class were constrained, the endless rules governing behavior and appearance, the limited acceptable paths for respectable life. Aaron listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed he grasped nuances that many men would have dismissed or failed to recognize. Their conversation deepened into territory that felt intimate despite its intellectual nature, each revelation creating stronger bonds of understanding. By afternoon, the rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, and Aaron declared that they should attempt to reach the next waypoint before nightfall. He had a friend, a trapper named Samuel Frost, who lived alone about 15 miles northeast. Samuel was a man who valued privacy and had his own reasons for avoiding entanglement with town authorities. He would provide shelter without asking uncomfortable questions, and his cabin would be far more comfortable than this tiny hunting shelter. They prepared to depart with careful attention to detail. Aaron wrapped Anna's ankle with fresh support, then helped her into a rain slicker that would keep her reasonably dry during the ride. He had retrieved 2 horses from a small corral hidden in the trees near the shelter, sturdy mountain ponies built for endurance rather than speed. Anna mounted with only minimal assistance, proud that her strength was returning despite the ordeal of recent days. The journey to Samuel Frost's cabin was challenging but uneventful. They traveled through country that grew increasingly wild, following game trails and creek beds rather than established paths. The rain created a gray curtain that reduced visibility but also provided cover, making it difficult for anyone to spot them from a distance. Aaron led with the confidence of someone who knew every ridge and valley, never hesitating even when Anna could see no distinguishing landmarks. They encountered no other travelers, which Aaron took as both good and bad news. Good because it meant Hale's search parties hadn't extended this far yet. Bad because it suggested those parties were focused on other, more direct routes to Helena. Eventually, Hale would realize they hadn't taken the obvious path and would expand his search. But by then, Aaron hoped they would have too great a head start to be easily caught. Samuel Frost's cabin appeared through the mist, like something from a fairy tale, larger and more substantial than Aaron's hunting shelter, but still modest by most standards. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, the door opened to reveal a bear of a man with a wild beard and sharp eyes that assessed them quickly. His gaze lingered on Anna with surprise before shifting to Aaron, and some silent communication passed between the men. Samuel welcomed them inside without preamble, helping Anna dismount and supporting her as she limped into the cabin's warmth. The interior was cluttered but clean, filled with furs and trapping equipment, along with an impressive collection of books that suggested Samuel's solitary life included significant reading. He poured them coffee laced with something stronger, and listened without interruption as Aaron explained their situation. When Aaron finished, Samuel was quiet for a moment, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Then he confirmed what they had feared. Word had indeed spread about the break-in at the Hale and Crawford office. A substantial reward was being offered for information about 2 intruders, described as a man matching Aaron's general description and a woman who walked with a limp. The story being circulated was that they had stolen important documents and mining claim deeds, that they were thieves and possibly murderers fleeing justice. Anna felt cold fury at this inversion of truth, but Samuel wasn't finished. He reported that Jack Cordell was leading the main search party, and they had been seen heading north toward the main Helena Road, apparently convinced that was the route the fugitives would take. But Samuel had also heard rumors of riders checking isolated cabins and settlements, systematically searching areas where someone might hide. It was only a matter of time before they worked their way to more remote locations. Samuel's assessment was that Aaron and Anna had perhaps 2 days before the search expanded enough to threaten even this refuge. He offered to shelter them for 1 night, but after that, they would need to keep moving. He also provided valuable intelligence about the route ahead, including which homesteaders could be trusted and which had questionable loyalties that might be swayed by reward money. That evening, as Anna rested her ankle and Samuel prepared a surprisingly good stew from dried venison and vegetables, the 3 of them discussed strategy. Samuel suggested a route that would take them west before turning north, adding perhaps a day to their journey, but avoiding areas where Hale's influence was strongest. There were mining camps in the western mountains, where men asked few questions and cared little about disputes in Silver Creek. More than that, Samuel offered something unexpected, his own assistance. He said he was planning to travel to Helena himself in a few days to sell his season's furs, and if Aaron and Anna could wait that long, he would accompany them. 3 travelers would be less suspicious than 2, and Samuel's presence would provide both additional protection and a plausible cover story for their journey. They could pose as a trapping party heading to market. Aaron and Anna exchanged glances, weighing this offer. The delay was risky, giving Hale more time to organize his search. But the advantages were significant, and Samuel's knowledge of the territory was extensive. After a brief, silent consultation that required no words, they accepted. Samuel nodded his satisfaction and said he would need tomorrow to prepare his furs and supplies, which meant they would depart the following morning. That night, Samuel insisted Anna take his bed while he and Aaron would sleep near the fire. Anna protested, but was overruled by both men, and she was too exhausted to argue strenuously. As she lay in the surprisingly comfortable bed, she could hear Aaron and Samuel talking quietly by the fire, their voices a low rumble that was oddly soothing. She caught fragments of conversation, Samuel asking questions about Anna, Aaron's responses brief but apparently satisfactory, Samuel's occasional laugh suggesting approval. The next day passed slowly as Samuel prepared for travel, and Aaron scouted the surrounding area for signs of search parties. Anna helped where she could, organizing supplies and checking the photographic plates to ensure they had survived the journey undamaged. The images were clear and damning, showing exactly the kind of evidence that would convince authorities of the conspiracy's scope and criminality. Looking at them, Anna felt renewed determination that her father's death would not go unavenged. In the afternoon, Samuel produced a worn deck of cards and taught Anna a gambling game popular among trappers. They played for dried beans rather than money, and Anna discovered she had a talent for reading bluffs and calculating odds. Samuel declared her a natural and joked that she could make a fortune in the saloons if she ever tired of respectable life. The casual companionship was healing in ways Anna hadn't expected. A reminder that not all human interaction needed to be fraught with danger or weighted with grief. Aaron returned as evening fell, reporting no signs of search activity in their immediate area, though he had seen distant riders on trails several miles south. The net was tightening, but slowly. If they departed at first light as planned, they should stay ahead of it. Samuel laid out the route they would follow, pointing out landmarks and places where they might need to take extra precautions. The journey would take 4 days if all went well, possibly 5 if they encountered difficulties. As they prepared for sleep, Anna found a moment alone with Aaron outside the cabin. The night air was cold and clear, the storm having passed, leaving behind a sky thick with stars. She thanked him again for everything he had done, for saving her life multiple times over, for risking his own safety to help her pursue justice. Aaron listened quietly, then told her that thanks were unnecessary between people who had become partners in purpose. There was something in the way he said partners that made Anna's breath catch. She looked up at him in the starlight and saw her own complicated feelings reflected in his expression. Gratitude and respect, certainly, but also something deeper and more personal that neither of them had yet named. The attraction between them had been building since that first night in his cabin, growing stronger with each shared danger and moment of trust. Aaron raised his hand slowly, giving her time to step back if she wished, and gently touched her face. His palm was warm against her cheek, calloused but tender, and Anna found herself leaning into the contact. For a long moment, they simply stood that way, acknowledging without words what was growing between them. Then Aaron withdrew his hand and stepped back, and Anna understood that he was giving her space to consider what she wanted, not pressuring or assuming. She told him softly that when this was over, when they had delivered the evidence and seen justice done, she would like to have a conversation about what came next, not about practical matters or plans for the future in a general sense, but about the specific possibility of a future that included both of them. Aaron's expression transformed, surprise giving way to something that looked remarkably like hope. He said he would very much like to have that conversation, and the smile he gave her was worth every hardship of the journey. They returned inside to find Samuel already asleep, his thunderous snoring filling the cabin. Anna and Aaron shared a look of amused understanding before settling into their own sleeping arrangements. But as Anna drifted off, she felt something had fundamentally shifted between them, an acknowledgement that what they were building together extended beyond the immediate crisis into territory that was both thrilling and terrifying to contemplate. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. They departed shortly after dawn, 3 riders heading west into country that grew progressively more rugged and remote. Samuel set a steady pace that ate up miles without exhausting the horses, and his knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable. He led them along paths that Anna would never have identified as routes, through narrow defiles and across high meadows that offered spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. They encountered other travelers occasionally, miners heading to or from their claims, a family of homesteaders moving to new land, a circuit preacher making his rounds. Each time, Samuel's easy manner and plausible story about taking furs to market deflected curiosity. Anna kept her head down and said little, playing the role of Samuel's niece, who was accompanying the men on their business trip. No one questioned the story closely. By the second day of travel with Samuel, they had crossed into territory where Hale's influence was minimal. The mining camps here operated independently, and the men who worked them had little patience for the kind of consolidation and control that the Silver Creek Consortium represented. Samuel had friends in several of these camps. Hard men who had fought to keep their claims independent, and would view Aaron and Anna's flight as justified resistance rather than criminal activity. They stopped at one such camp for the noon meal, and Samuel introduced them to a grizzled prospector named Dutch Henry, who fed them stew and bread while sharing news from farther north. Dutch confirmed that territorial marshals in Helena were known to be honest men, not in the pocket of mining interests like so many local sheriffs. If Anna and Aaron could reach Helena with their evidence, they stood a good chance of seeing real action taken against Hale and his associates. But Dutch also warned them that the last stretch of the journey would be the most dangerous. As they got closer to Helena, they would need to pass through areas where Hale had business connections and allies. It was likely that watches had been set on approaches to the territorial capital, men looking specifically for fugitives matching their descriptions. They would need to be especially cautious in those final miles. The warning proved prophetic sooner than expected. On the morning of what should have been their final full day of travel, Aaron spotted riders in the distance, moving with the purposeful pattern of men conducting a search. He, Anna, and Samuel immediately took cover in a dense stand of pines, watching as the party of 6 men worked their way along the trail they had been following. Through a small spyglass, Aaron identified Jack Cordell among the riders. The 3 travelers waited in tense silence until the search party had moved well past their position. Then Samuel led them on a long detour that added hours to their journey, but kept them well clear of the searchers. As they rode, Aaron explained that Cordell's presence this far from Silver Creek confirmed how seriously Hale was taking the threat. The outlaw was not known for his patience or his willingness to spend days in the saddle unless significant money was involved. They made camp that night in a small canyon that Samuel knew, a place invisible from any trail and defensible if it came to that. No fire was risked despite the cold, and they ate a cheerless meal of dried meat and hard biscuits. The proximity of danger had killed conversation, and they settled to sleep in shifts with one person always on watch. Anna took the middle watch, sitting with Aaron's rifle across her knees and listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. During her watch, Aaron woke and came to sit beside her. Though it was not yet time for him to take over, they sat in companionable silence for a time before Aaron spoke quietly about what would happen when they reached Helena. He explained that once the evidence was turned over to authorities, there would be an investigation that might take weeks or months. Anna would likely need to remain in Helena to provide testimony and answer questions. Her return to the east, if she still wanted that, would be delayed significantly. Anna had been thinking about exactly this issue, about what came after they completed their immediate mission. The truth was, she no longer knew if she wanted to return to Philadelphia at all. Her mother was gone, her father was dead, and the life she had known there felt like it belonged to a different person entirely. The woman who had boarded that train west weeks ago would barely recognize who she had become, what she had survived and accomplished. The question of where she belonged now had no easy answer. She shared these thoughts with Aaron, admitting her uncertainty about the future beyond seeing justice done for her father. Aaron listened, with the focused attention he brought to everything, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment before responding. He said that Helena was a growing city with need for educated people, that a woman with her background could find meaningful work there if she chose to stay in the territory. Teaching, perhaps, or work with one of the charitable organizations that served miners' families. There was careful neutrality in how he presented these options, but Anna heard the unspoken question beneath them. He was offering her reasons to stay that didn't depend on him, giving her a choice free from obligation or presumption. It was characteristic of his respect for her autonomy, but it also left her wondering what he wanted, whether his interest in her future extended beyond friendship and shared purpose. She decided that uncertainty had gone on long enough. She told him plainly that while she appreciated his suggestions about Helena, what she most wanted to know was whether he would be there. Whether the conversation they had agreed to have about their possible future together was something he still wanted, or if he had been offering comfort in a moment of stress without meaning it to extend beyond their immediate crisis. Aaron's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet night. He turned to look at her directly, and even in the darkness she could see the intensity in his eyes. He told her that every word he had spoken about wanting that conversation was sincere, that his feelings for her had grown far beyond admiration for her courage or sympathy for her losses. He had come to care for her in ways that complicated his carefully constructed, solitary life. And yes, he very much hoped she might choose to stay in territory where he could continue to know her, to build on what had begun between them. The honesty and vulnerability in his admission moved Anna deeply. She reached for his hand in the darkness and held it tightly, telling him that she felt the same way, that what had developed between them was unlike anything she had experienced before. She couldn't promise what shape their future might take, but she could promise that she wanted to explore the possibility. to see where these feelings might lead when they no longer had to focus entirely on survival. Aaron brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture that managed to be both courtly and intimate. Then they sat together in the darkness, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead and feeling that despite all the danger still ahead, something precious and rare was being built between them. When Samuel woke to take his turn at watch, he found them still sitting that way and smiled to himself before settling into his own position without comment. The final day of travel brought them to within 10 miles of Helena as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. They could see the smoke of the territorial capital rising in the distance, a smudge against the sky that represented safety and justice and the end of their desperate flight. But those last miles would be the most dangerous, and they approached them with renewed caution, knowing that Cordell and his associates would have concentrated their efforts on the approaches to the city. Samuel led them on one final detour, bringing them toward Helena from an unexpected direction, along a route that required them to dismount and lead their horses down a treacherous slope. It was slow going, especially for Anna, whose ankle protested the careful descent, but it brought them to the outskirts of Helena unobserved. As the lights of the city became visible through the gathering dusk, all three of them felt the weight of their journey beginning to lift. They had made it. Against all odds, through danger and hardship, they had brought the evidence that would bring down murderers and expose a conspiracy of theft and violence. Tomorrow, they would present themselves to the territorial marshal with photographs that would change everything. But tonight, as they made their way through Helena's streets toward the marshal's office, Anna allowed herself to feel something she hadn't permitted in weeks. Hope not just for justice, but for a future that might include building a life in this wild territory with a man unlike any she had ever known. The territorial marshal's office in Helena was an imposing brick building that spoke of authority and permanence, a sharp contrast to the rough frontier justice Anna had encountered in Silver Creek. Marshal William Crenshaw was a man in his late 50s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen enough of human nature to be skeptical of everything, but convinced by solid evidence. He listened to their story without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing as Anna and Aaron laid out the conspiracy that had claimed her father's life and so many others. When they produced the photographic plates and Samuel corroborated their account of being pursued across nearly 100 miles of wilderness, Crenshaw's expression finally shifted to something approaching belief. He examined the photographs with a magnifying glass, his mouth tightening into a grim line as he reviewed the damning evidence of fraud and corruption. After nearly an hour of careful study, he set down the last plate and looked at them with an intensity that suggested he was making calculations about risk and reward. He told them that what they had brought him was extraordinary. Evidence of criminal conspiracy on a scale that would shake the entire Montana territory. With testimony this compelling and evidence this solid, he could issue warrants for the arrest of Hale, Crawford, Jack Cordell, and several others named in the ledgers as recipients of corrupt payments. He would send deputies to Silver Creek within the week to execute those warrants. But he strongly recommended that Anna, Aaron, and Samuel remain in Helena under protective custody until the principals were apprehended. The next week passed in a strange limbo of waiting and uncertainty. Deputies rode out to Silver Creek with warrants, but word came back that both Hale and Crawford had fled, warned by some unknown source that their conspiracy had been exposed. Jack Cordell had similarly vanished, though several of his associates were arrested trying to hide in the hills outside town. Sheriff Dalton was taken into custody after a brief standoff, and Peter Sutton, the nervous clerk who had provided crucial information, was placed under protection. Anna spent her days giving detailed depositions to territorial prosecutors, recounting everything from her father's last letters to the moment Aaron freed her from that terrible trap. The lawyers were thorough and occasionally skeptical, but the physical evidence of her injuries and the photographs of the ledgers gave her testimony undeniable weight. Aaron provided his own account, carefully detailing his tracking of Cordell, his discovery of Anna, and the subsequent flight to Helena. Samuel departed after the first week, his furs sold, and his testimony recorded for trial. Before he left, he pulled Aaron aside for a conversation that Anna was not privy to, though she saw them clasping forearms in the manner of men who had formed a bond of genuine friendship. The trapper's presence would be missed. His practical wisdom and steady temperament had been an anchor during their flight. As days turned into weeks, Anna's ankle healed completely, leaving only faint scars as evidence of her ordeal. Word eventually came that Vernon Hale had been apprehended in San Francisco, attempting to board a ship for the Orient. Silas Crawford was found in Denver, living under an assumed name. Both men were being transported back to Montana to face charges of fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and a host of other crimes. The trial was set for early spring, nearly 4 months after Anna and Aaron's arrival in Helena. The territorial prosecutor was confident of conviction given the evidence, and Anna would need to remain available to testify. It was this practical necessity that finally forced the conversation Anna and Aaron had been circling around for weeks. One evening, as they sat in the boarding house parlor after the other guests had retired, Aaron broached the subject directly. He told Anna that he had been offered a position as chief tracker and guide for the Territorial Survey Office, work that would keep him based in Helena for much of the year. It was steady employment with decent pay, the kind of opportunity he had never sought before because it required giving up his solitary life in the mountains. But his solitary life no longer held the appeal it once had, not after experiencing partnership and connection with someone who understood him. He was willing to take the position and settle in Helena if Anna thought she might build a life here as well. She told him that she'd been offered a teaching position at Helena's School for Girls, that the headmistress had been impressed by her credentials and desperate for someone with Eastern training who was willing to settle in the territory. She had been considering the offer, but hesitating because she wasn't certain what other reasons she had to stay beyond professional opportunity. Now, hearing about Aaron's position with the survey office, she found her uncertainty evaporating. Anna abandoned propriety entirely and spoke with the honesty that had become her habit since coming west. She told Aaron that she had fallen in love with him, that somewhere between him whispering that she would live, and this moment in a Helena boarding house, her heart had become entirely his. She wanted to build a life here, not just because of professional opportunities, but because a life without him in it felt incomplete. Aaron's response was to cross the distance between them and pull her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of weeks of restraint finally breaking. When they finally broke apart, Aaron's forehead rested against hers as he whispered words in Cherokee that she didn't understand but felt in her soul. He told her in English that he loved her as well, that she had transformed his understanding of what his life could be. He wanted to marry her if she would have him, wanted to build a home and a future together in this territory that had tested them both and found them worthy. The wedding took place in late winter, a small ceremony in the boarding house parlor, attended by Marshal Crenshaw and his sister, Samuel Frost, who traveled from his cabin for the occasion, Peter Sutton, and several other people who had become part of their lives during the months in Helena. As they exchanged vows, Anna thought about how impossibly far she had traveled from that moment in the trap when she had been certain she would die alone in the wilderness. The trial began in March with considerable public attention. Anna's testimony was given over 2 days, and she spoke with calm authority about her father's work, his suspicions about the accounting irregularities, and his ultimate disappearance. The photographs of the hidden ledgers were entered as evidence, and expert witnesses confirmed their authenticity. Aaron testified about finding Anna in the trap and his subsequent investigation into the conspiracy. Vernon Hale and Silas Crawford were convicted on all counts and sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. Sheriff Dalton received 15 years for his role in the conspiracy. The mining claims that had been fraudulently obtained were ordered returned to the families of the deceased or sold with proceeds going to those families. It was as complete a victory as the legal system could provide, though no amount of justice could truly compensate for the lives that had been lost. With the trial concluded, Anna and Aaron could finally settle into the life they had chosen. They purchased a small house on the outskirts of Helena, with money Anna received from the sale of her father's legitimately owned mining claim. The house had a view of the mountains that Aaron loved, and enough space for Anna to create a small library and study. Anna threw herself into her teaching work with passion, educating daughters of miners and ranchers, preparing young women for lives of greater possibility than previous generations had known. A year after their marriage, Anna gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Grace. The baby had Aaron's unusual eye color and Anna's determined temperament, and Aaron proved to be a devoted father, patient and gentle with the infant, in ways that surprised some who knew only his reputation as a tracker and wilderness guide. Years passed. The story of Anna's ordeal and the subsequent exposure of the mining conspiracy became part of Montana Territory's lore. Details were embellished with each retelling, but the essential truth remained. A woman had traveled from the east seeking her father, had nearly died at the hands of corrupt men, and had brought them to justice with the help of a Cherokee tracker, who became her husband. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, Anna and Aaron were among those invited to the celebration in the new capital. Standing in the crowd, Anna reflected on how much had changed since that autumn day 8 years earlier, when she had stepped into a trap set by an outlaw. She had come west seeking answers about her father and had found not just those answers, but an entire life she never could have imagined. That evening, as they prepared for bed in their Helena home with young Sarah asleep in the next room, Aaron asked Anna if she ever regretted how things had unfolded. Anna considered the question seriously before responding. She told him that regret implied wanting to change the past, and while she would always grieve her father's death, she could not wish away the journey that had brought her to this moment. The woman she had become, the partnership she had forged with Aaron, the work she did teaching young women, the family they were building together, all of it had grown from those terrible days of pain and danger. Aaron pulled her close and kissed the top of her head, telling her that he felt the same way. His life had been half-lived before she stumbled into it, existing without really living, surviving without thriving. She had given him reasons to engage with the world beyond simple necessity, had shown him that connection and vulnerability were strengths rather than weaknesses. As they lay together in the darkness, Anna thought about that moment in the ravine when Aaron had whispered that she would live if she could just hold on. She had held on through pain and terror and grief, had fought for survival and then for justice, and in doing so had discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. But more than that, she had discovered that holding on sometimes meant opening yourself to help, to partnership, to love. The steel trap that had closed around her ankle that day had been meant to kill her, to silence her questions and protect guilty men. Instead, it had become the catalyst for transformation, the moment when her old life ended and a new one began. She had walked into a devil's snare set by an outlaw, but she had been pulled free by a hunter who had become so much more. Together, they had built something that neither could have created alone, a life of purpose and meaning in a territory still being shaped by people brave enough to believe they could make it better. Years later, When Sarah was old enough to understand, Anna and Aaron would tell her the story of how they met. They would describe the dangers they had faced and the choices they had made, the way courage sometimes meant continuing forward even when terrified, the way justice sometimes required risking everything for what was right. And they would tell her that love sometimes arrived in the most unexpected circumstances, that the best partnerships were forged in fire and tempered by adversity. But on this night, with Montana's future stretching before them, full of possibility and promise, Anna simply held her husband close and felt grateful for the journey that had brought them together. She had come west, seeking answers about loss, and had found instead a new beginning, had faced death in a mountain ravine, and had been reborn into a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she had imagined possible. The trap that was meant to end her story had instead become its true beginning, and for that unexpected gift she would always be thankful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.